Welcome out to the Robbie Law Podcast. I am here with Cesar Castro. Did I roll the R's right?
You rolled them perfectly.
Perfectly is not right. So I'm really excited for this opportunity to interview him because we have such a similar background as far as what we're trying to do, help leaders, inspire people to tell their story, to share it with more power, to share it with more fervor and excitement. And so today we're going to be talking a lot about storytelling. We're going to be talking about communication skills. So get excited for listening in here today with Cesar Castro. All right, Cesar, thank you so much for joining me here. I'm here at Ignite Studios. Pretty cool place, right?
It's an awesome place, and thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear more. And really, I would really just love to have you jump in. We met through a friend. You were at an event, and they said, hey, talk to Robbie. And then we went to coffee, and we hung out. Well, I had coffee, and we hung out, and you shared your background, and I was so interested. I'm like, I want to find out more. I want to get to the root of this. How did you develop your skill set? How did you learn about storytelling? How did you realize you could impact other people? If we could kind of go down that direction, I would love to start with where are you from and where'd you grow up, and we'll go there.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Chile. I was born in South America. And when I was about 7, my family moved to the United States. So I've got this kind of mix of cultures, Chilean parents, and always teaching me those values and those principles. And then also growing up here in the States, being able to pick up a new language and also the great things of this culture. One of the reasons why I got into storytelling was because when I moved here at school, I went to a small little Linden Elementary School.
So funny. I was at Northridge Elementary. Like we were just a stone's throw away from each other growing up. It's
growing up, just really, really close. And it just so happened that Linden Elementary was one of the only elementary schools where they were piloting a storytelling course, right? They were teaching kids storytelling at school. And I kind of took it because it was a way for me to practice my English. And I was, to be honest with you, at first I was horrible. I didn't speak the language. So I was really scared to get up and talk in public and compete because they would do like little competitions in class. Yeah. And I still remember one day, I had been here for about 3 or 4 months. So the language, I was picking it up a little bit. And I got to class early and I sat next to the teacher. She had a little seat there right next to me, so I could ask for help. And that day she walked up to me and she said, Cesar, she was trying to learn some Spanish words, right? So she's like, Cesar, hoy, you storytell, contar historia. And I was like, I can't believe she's asking me this, right? She's not asking me to get up in front of my class and tell a story, because that's what she would do every Monday.
Yeah.
She would get kids to come up in front of class, and she'd pick 3 or 4 random kids and they would share a story. And I never thought it was gonna be my turn because I didn't even speak the language. So when she asked me that, at first I acted like I didn't understand. Right? I was like,
I always wondered if people that speak a different language do that. Like, no entiendo.
No entiendo. And she just looked at me. She's like, yes, you can do it. And she just started the class. And I was thinking in my mind, like, okay, I said, I no entender. So that means that she's not going to call on me. And she starts, picking random kids, 1, 2, 3. And then all of a sudden I hear my name. Cesar, it's your turn. And Robbie, even though this happened, a long time ago, I was about 8 years old at that time, I still remember the feelings that I had. Right at that moment, my heart just started racing. My hands started sweating. My knees were shaking. I just walked up to the front of the class. And when I turn around and I look at my 30 little classmates all looking at me, my mind just went blank. And I was like, oh, what am I going to say? ¿Qué digo? What do I say? And all of a sudden, I remembered a little story, just a little simple story of something that I had done with my family a few weeks before. And I tried to tell that story to the best of my abilities, very Tarzan English at that time. I tried to tell my story. Felt like I was up there for 10 minutes, but probably just, 30 seconds. And once I finished telling the story, I went and sat back down. And I just remember sitting and just kind of putting my hands on my face and thinking, oh, did such a horrible job. No one understood your story. You probably didn't even say it right. And after a few seconds, I finally got the courage to look up. And to my surprise, and this is to me a before and after moment, and it's actually kind of the origins of why I got into storytelling afterwards. Because right as I look up and I look at all my classmates, they're all looking at me and they're all going like this with their little thumbs, their little thumbs up, like saying, good job. And that to me was a before and after. That was such a powerful experience to just feel what I think is the first time I felt the power of a story, of telling a story and connecting somehow with the audience, even though it wasn't the best story, but being able to have that interaction and that connection with my classmates. And it got to the point where I just enjoyed that so much. It was such a powerful experience for me at that time that every week, every Monday, I would be raising my hand.
You're the
I
guy.
wanted, I wanted to
You're the guy.
participate.
That's
I want to
me. I'm
participate.
ready.
I want
I
to tell
got
a
a
story. And
story.
I would start preparing stories. And then I would start obviously getting better. And then the teacher started inviting me to compete. And by the time I was 10, 11, I was winning the scholastic storytelling competitions. And by the time I was 12, I won the national storytelling competition that they do like at school level,
Yeah.
and got invited to the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival. And that just kind of started, this whole domino effect. To be honest with you, now as a professional, I never thought that I'd be doing this
I was going
professionally.
to ask that. I was going to say, like, when you were a kid, were you like thinking, I'll just do storytelling the rest of my life? Like,
It was just something that you do for fun. I enjoyed it, and I felt that, wow, it's something that I'm good at, but it wasn't something I would ever think that I would be teaching someone else how to do. Because in my mind, once you get older and I'm now working in the corporate world, I thought that, this was something that everyone did. I very naively thought that, all leaders that were in these big positions, they probably were all good communicators. They were probably really good storytellers. And I kind of faced reality when I started going into the corporate world and working, that most of the leaders I was working with were not doing that. And they weren't very good at it either. And that's where kind of, the light bulb moment was like, hey, they got to do it, because part of what leadership is all about is communication and knowing how to inspire, knowing how to motivate, and they don't know how to do it. So someone's got to help.
Yeah, I love that. I think back in my career, like the majority of leaders that I knew how to inspire us with a vision.
Yeah.
They could stand up and in 5 minutes we were going, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
The leaders that didn't work out long term, because I had some great companies I work with that just fizzled. And it was mostly because of leadership from what I was looking at, because I was always in a position to be around the leader. And so I could watch and witness what they were doing and how it was being done as from an operations and a sales standpoint. And the majority of leaders that struggled to be able to move forward with their business long term did not know how to tell a story. Yeah. Did not know how to inspire vision. Yeah. Or the stories they told weren't true. And that, that's another thing that happens.
Yeah. A few years ago, I think it was like 2016, 17, there's a big study that Harvard did in regards to communication skills, leadership communication skills. It was one of the biggest, actually. I think they studied about 10,000 leaders from all around the world. And they found a few interesting things. First, they were able to determine really quickly that the higher you move up in the leadership role or position in an organization, the more importance your communication skills are. They even said that certain positions, like 80-90% of what you were doing in your day-to-day was related to communication, whether that be public communication, interpersonal communication, now digital communication. But if you think about it, like most of the time what you're doing in your day-to-day, especially when you're at a leadership position, is communicating, right? So I always tell my clients, I'm like, look, if I were to tell you, I'll give you your job description. I'm like, 80% of your job's going to be to communicate. You better be good at it, right? Because that's a big chunk of your responsibility. So the first thing they found in this study was the higher you move up, the more importance your communication skills come, right? And the second thing they found is that when they were studying, okay, so we know that they got to communicate really well. They got to be effective communicators. So what is effective communication? They kind of synthesized it in 3 main characteristics. They said an effective communicator is someone who communicates with simplicity, right? Clarity, and with relevancy. Okay, simplicity, being able to communicate in a way that anyone can understand using simple language. Clarity is having objectives. Relevancy has to do more with emotions, right? How do you make something relevant for the other person? And we know as human beings, we find things relevant when we feel things, right? It's not just about the arguments, it's also about what we feel. And when they were studying these 10,000 leaders, what they found is that less than 10% of them could be considered effective communicators. They didn't have these characteristics, and the one that they lacked the most was relevancy. See, most leaders, some of them knew how to do simple or clear communication, but they had no idea about how to make things relevant. And that's where I think storytelling fits like a perfect ring, because storytelling is all about that. It's all about how you can make any message or any idea relevant to the audience by making them feel something.
Yeah, I love that. It's so interesting because I don't know this study, but I have come to the same conclusions. Simplicity, clarity, and what I call context. Context to me is like that relevancy. How relevant is it to me? And you've got to help create context for people as to why the information is important for them. And that's what the story does. Yeah. Because it helps them live this vision in their mind of what's actually taking place. And it becomes so much more real because our mind then creates the chemical that
Yeah.
then creates the feeling that helps us feel this thing. And so we have to learn how to create context for people. That's exactly what I'm saying those leaders lacked.
Yeah.
Because they could do bullet points. They could do task oriented. They could do, here, you need to do this stuff. They could do push people into doing their things, but they couldn't lead in a way where people wanted to do what they wanted to do. And it's because they didn't have that relevancy, that context of why they should do it. That's where the stories come in.
Yeah. There's a quote from Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower, general, president. He says the art of influence or leadership is getting people to go where you want them to go, but because they want to go with you. And I always think like the first part is not that hard, right? Getting people to go where you want them to go. If you're the leader, if you're the authority, you can push people there. But getting people to go where you want them to go because they want to go with you.
Yeah.
That's influence.
That's my style of speaker right there, because I hate the guy that's up there screaming at everybody, telling them what to do, telling them why it's right for them, telling them why they've got to do it. It just, not everyone receives that information. There's some people, they're in a place where they're going, man, I need someone to scream at me and tell me what to do, but not everybody. And I think that's where those types of speakers miss, is it's like, you got to give options and choices.
Yeah.
Otherwise you will not have someone that's bought in, because they are accountable to you telling them what to do versus being accountable to going, this is what I want.
Yeah.
When people are at that place where they're saying, this is what I want for myself, they are so much more likely to follow through in every single area of life and business. It's not just, storytelling. It's like they're ready to move forward and be better because of that. So
exactly.
I want to talk more about this study, but tell me what, if you want to make something relevant for someone and you want to build that emotion in that context, what about the people that say that's manipulative to use emotion when you're telling stories?
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
They're right. I mean, to be honest, there's a thin line between manipulation and influence. That's what I believe. And that's what I've kind of seen working with thousands of leaders, right? Like you see leaders sometimes that have that ability to get people emotionally engaged and emotionally connected. And if they're using that in a way that skill they have to get people somewhere just because they want to get them there, it doesn't matter if it's going to be something that benefits you or not. I think that's manipulation. I think that like every day in our life, if you think about it, we're always being either influenced or manipulated into something, right? Me as a father, I'm always trying to influence my kids. And I want my kid to, for example, learn certain values or have certain behaviors that I know will help him. That's the ethical part that comes behind it, what you're doing when you have these skill sets, right? Communication, storytelling, they're all influence or even manipulation skill sets, right?
Yes.
And that's why we see great leaders or we see also tyrants who have these skill sets.
Yeah.
But I think that what is at the core and what kind of, for me, differentiates whether this will be manipulation or influence will be the intention behind it.
I love that. That is exactly the way I teach people, man. This is why I knew you and I would work together on this. Because I sit here and go, my first module is called intention, because I make people do a disclaimer. Man, I've taught these skills to people that can use them for whatever they want.
Yeah.
And it at one point weighed on me, and I said, I can't do that anymore. So I started building this disclaimer. So whenever I'm doing deep dives and I'm really, showing the language that can be utilized, posture language, the right storytelling language, I want to make sure that their heart is clear and their ethics are in place, because there is a wrong way to use this information. There is a right way to use this information, and it all remains inside our heart. My mentor gives the best analogy on this, because he says speaking is a superpower. And I completely agree. You can predict the future, you can drive people, you can inspire action, you can get anything to go across the line. You think way back in time, the most important moments in history were public speeches.
Yeah.
So he says, you look at Superman has this superpower. He can fly. He's got laser beams coming out of it. He's got all these different things he can do.
Yeah.
Well, who's his nemesis? His arch rival is someone called General Zod, who has the exact same skills.
Yeah.
He has the ability to fly. He has this extra human strength. He's got the laser beams. He's got all the stuff except one thing. And he doesn't have the heart that Superman has.
Yeah.
And so that's why the story is so compelling. But that same thing goes in this real world. Like, if we want to have that superpower, we have to be willing to go, I'm going to share this in the right ways.
Yeah.
And you've done this now for, I want to say, like 15 years.
That I've been working with
storytelling and leadership training.
Yeah, for about 10 years.
10 years.
10 years I've been.
2014, I think.
2012 is when I started like officially. Before then I was working in consulting and stuff, and I was doing leadership development.
Yeah.
But I started my own company in 2012.
Let's talk about that.
My first company I went in focused on leadership development, right? I had been working in the corporate world for a while, and I was seeing these lack of skills and the
Yeah.
importance of communication. I to be honest, like, and probably comes a lot with my background in storytelling. And as a kid, I was one of those kids that would love to go like watch great speakers. I was always enamored by great communicators. And when I thought about leaders and great leaders, I was always attracted to these leaders that were really good communicators, even though at that time I didn't really know why. I liked Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, those type of leaders. And I was like, I don't know why I like him so much.
Jesus, like they stick out in your mind. These people that are standing talking to a group stick out in your mind. They
Nelson
really,
Mandela,
really do.
those type of leaders. And as I obviously started getting older and studying more about leadership, I started understanding that what really attracted me to these leaders were their communication skills. And specifically, as you study the communication skills, you see that most of these great leaders are also really, really good storytellers. That's part of the communication skill that they have. When I noticed as I was working in the corporate world that a lot of the leaders that I was helping out and I was working as a consultant and for a corporate company, there's something missing here. And I felt that being in the corporate world, I couldn't have as much impact as if I just tried to do it on my own. So I 2012, 30 years old, decided to start my own consulting company. And my focus was on leadership development. That was the focus of the organization. And obviously leadership development is broad. It's a big umbrella. And as I started working with a few banks in Latin America, we were doing these huge transformation projects. And the first part of any transformation project usually requires like leaders communicating, right? And getting people on board.
Buy-in.
Yeah, getting buy-in. So I was at that stage working with the leaders, and the project we were doing like more than just the communication part. We were doing other aspects. We were doing coaching with the leaders and trainings and all that. But one of the important aspects of this project was leaders had to have meetings with their teams and they had to communicate the change that was going to happen. I was super excited at first because I was like, oh, I'm going to be able to go watch these leaders, right? They were all corporate C-suite guys. I'm going to be able to go watch them just blow it out of the water. That's what I was thinking.
You think the executive room gets them prepared for that moment, but it does not.
No.
There is a strategy.
Yeah, and just like over and over again, I was going to these meetings with these leaders, and I was sitting in the back, to watch them, and they were boring. And you'd actually see how when they'd walk in the room, just the whole energy would change.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Before they were in the room, people were relaxed, people were having fun, even engaged. And then the moment the leader walked into the room, people would get stiff, people would get nervous, and then the leader would start speaking and people would fall asleep.
It's just downhill from there.
Energy down. And this is an important aspect because I believe that one of the important roles of a leader is to elevate the energy, right? Because you want people to take action, you want people to move. And in order for people to move, you need to elevate energy. But I was seeing the opposite. And if it would have happened with one, maybe I would have been like, oh, it's a fluke thing. But it happened with every single one of them. And that was like the first time that I was faced with this reality of like, who's teaching them this, right? Who's helping them with this?
Yeah, what's their strategy?
I thought that someone was helping them.
Yeah.
Because they hadn't called me in as their communication coach. They had just called me in as a leadership development and helping them with this transformational project. But it wasn't that they were calling me in to help them with communication. And then as I started talking with HR and saying, hey, I think like these leaders need a little bit more skill set in this. A lot of times they would be like, no, they've had, a coach that they've worked with, or we've taken them to effective communication or presentations class or whatever. They've had a few things, but you weren't really seeing it translate, right? And I had one of the managers that I was working with became really good friends with me. And he actually became really good friends with me because he saw me as a coach, and he was one of those clients that's like always sending me texts or emails like, Cesar, I need your help. And what should I do here? Like he was really using my help as a coach. And I was like, I'm going to help this guy. And I'm gonna try to work on his communication skills.
Set an example.
Just
for everybody
set an example.
In the room. I know the whole thing.
Yeah,
I've been trying to bite my lip the whole time going, we live parallel lives.
I'm going to try some things out with him. That was like, and I even told him, I'm like, look, would you be okay if like I teach you a little bit about storytelling? And at that time I didn't even have a methodology. It was just kind of what I did. And I did a reverse engineer and created my own methodology to try to teach him how to do it. Right. Yeah. And he was super open to it. Started working with him, started teaching him storytelling so he could do his presentations. And he did such an incredible job. Like his transformation was huge. And even HR, when they'd go to his meetings, they would tell me like, he is different, right? Like now his meetings, his teams were excited to go to his meetings. His teams were excited to listen to him speak. He was having more engagement, more connection with his teams. And the results, obviously, out of the roof. So by the end of that year, his results were at least 60, 70% better than anyone else. And HR came to me and said,
What are you doing?
What are you doing with him? What's different?
Going on?
What's different?
Why?
Yeah.
I love it. It is so parallel to what my experience has been. When people opt into your coaching and they want to do it and they want to work with you, it is just like it's like adding gas to the fire, and they're just going. The people, every company that's ever assigned me somebody, every single time, the learning curve is so much longer because there's a building rapport phase where they have to trust your information because they didn't opt in.
Yeah.
If they opt in, and I literally, every company I work with, I go, the only way I'm doing this is if every single person knows that I'm coming and I am edified and people know my background already and I don't have to convince them I can help, because the moment I have to sell myself to my client in the middle of coaching, I'm not in a good place.
Yeah.
So they need to have already agreed to that. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't want to work with them, because it just becomes such a drudgery to work with someone who doesn't want help.
Yeah.
It's like, I think of all the time, I think of a good friend of mine who, he was an alcoholic and he wanted to quit. And we tried so hard and we tried everything for him. I'd been through substance abuse. So I was trying to be like every night we were talking, and I was trying to help him manage his addiction. And, he just didn't want it like I did, and the people around him. And it eventually took his life because he didn't want it enough for himself. The people around him all wanted it for him.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that goes when we're learning. So we kind of led into this with ethics, and I was talking about ethics, and I said, I want to know about your background. How are you, as you share these stories, helping get across to the other individual the power of these things? And also showing them like they're also so powerful that you can use them in the wrong way. Do you mention it? Do you tell them it's that powerful? I usually do it up front, but I'm curious on how you do that, because I don't want to teach people that don't abide by those principles,
First, I'm very aligned with kind of what you also talked about in regards to, especially when you're getting people through a coaching or, a training process, it has to be something that they want.
Yeah.
I tried the other, and it's no fun. It's no fun for me or for the person, right?
Yeah.
And when you have someone who really wants to learn, who is committed to that process, it's magic.
Yeah, and here's the thing, like I'm sitting here thinking of this, like that person says yes and opts in because of a story.
Yeah.
So whoever communicates to that individual and tells a story right, that's why they opt in.
Yeah.
People will buy into literally everything with the right information.
Exactly.
When it's presented in the right order, when it's presented the right way, with the right emotion, with all of that, they'll say yes, everything. So it's interesting that you're talking about how these people have to convince, but they have to use the skill that you need to teach them in order to do it.
Exactly. Because then obviously if you're able to tell a good story from the very beginning, I think storytelling, we think a lot about storytelling in like the public speaking setting, you know, when you're going to give a presentation, and obviously there you have a lot more time to prepare it and make sure everything is, to the dot. But I believe storytelling is something we use in our everyday relationships, right? In our everyday communication. So I even have stories that I share and that I kind of already have, in my toolkit, where if I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I know what questions to ask to get people to speak and open up. And then I know what stories to tell that'll get people to also connect with me and feel trust for me, feel like for me. And we know that when people feel, trust, like, you're in a good place to continue, obviously, now influencing with other things.
And that is the first step. Like, that's like the opening feeling that we've got to get. We've got to get to that comfortable feeling as soon as we can with the other individual. And I remember feeling that with you very quickly. I remember I had put the wrong address down, so I'm calling you. I'm like, man, I'm 10 minutes away. I'm sorry. I'm cruising in. So I came in a little bit late, and that always makes me feel embarrassed because I like to be very professional with everything I do. And so I'm strolling in late, and I came in, and you were just so cordial, and you did draw me in with your background. You drew me in because I'm going, what I'm trying to do when I meet someone like you is learn. Mm-hmm. I look at you and go, man, 10 years of doing leadership training. He's got all the language down for, talking about his ideas and methods and stuff. For me, that presents such an opportunity of knowledge transfer. Mm-hmm. So like this moment right here, I crave this because when I'm working with a company, it's the first place I start. I go to the CEO or founder and I go, tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Tell me all the good, all the bad, because that's the messaging that we're going to eventually utilize is all of that stuff. So I can attest that you definitely make people feel comfortable. So whatever you're doing is working.
Well, and I can attest that desire you have to learn is, I mean, I think you're the first person that I've had like a coffee with that took out his iPad and was taking notes while we were just having a normal conversation.
I want to pull him
out. It was something new to me, but at the same time, I was like, oh, this guy really is interested in learning and knowing about the other person. It's not just, let's have a coffee and then we'll forget about each other.
Yeah, I think everyone that's ever sat down with me for a meeting has had that exact same feeling when I pull it out and then I start, writing all these details and color coding it and, I'll screenshot it and send it to him after, I don't want to miss anything, man. I feel like life is so short and we've got such a great opportunity in the world that we live in right now, to be able to just advance as a human being in so many ways. I look at my last 3 or 4 years and go, I've learned this, I've learned this, I've learned this. I've just kept learning all these things. And to some, that's like, well, focus on your main thing. I'm like, well, I love the experience, man. I can play the harmonica now. I can sing on stage. I can do things that I didn't ever challenge myself to do. And, that mental switch of just going, I want to learn. I want to get the most out of this. That's, to me, I believe it's something we can turn other people on with.
Yeah.
Like, I think we can be on stage and go, let's talk about your notes and why you should have good notes today.
Yeah.
Because I think the number one thing that people come up to me, and I actually got it from a different person, they'll come up to me and say, Robbie, that your note-taking strategy, I still use it. I remember you. I still use that today. Because it's like having something to help you retain the information is like statistically proven. You want to be a better communicator, learn how to write it down so it's visual. Now you can actually see it. Say it out loud so that it's audible so you can actually hear it. Think about it long enough so you can digest it so you can actually feel it. Go through all the different ways you can accept that information and follow through with it.
Yeah.
And as we tell stories, that's what we're doing. Think, touch, feel, hear. It's VACOG, all the keen senses that we have, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gastrointestinal, and we throw all of those things in, and when we do the story right, they make the choice up here themselves instead of us for them.
Yeah.
Because we lay it out for them to be able to visualize it and go, that does make sense and I want to move forward.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful things that happens, and when we do it right, when we were able to tell a story and we're really connecting with the audience. I always say that one of the things that really hurt my ego initially is when I came to the understanding that people don't want to listen to your story just because they want to listen to your story. Or maybe your mom and dad, because they love you and they'll always listen to your stories. Your client, your customer, your colleagues, your team, they want to listen to their story through yours. And when we're able to do that, when we're able to understand that psychological principle that people, when they're listening to you, in a way, they're trying to understand your story by going over their own story, right? And when you're able to tell a story where the other person feels identified or connected with your story, that's when magic occurs.
Yeah.
And that's where relationships are built. That's where trust is really founded, is when we have stories that connect us.
And those are the anchor points.
Yeah.
Those are the anchor points. Like when you think of, I think of Jesus because he's so impactful for the world.
Mm-hmm.
His, I can't remember where he spoke, but it was like the Beatitudes and what was the mountain where they had all the bread that came to them? I'm out on my Jesus knowledge, but I think of those moments and I picture him standing there orating to all these people.
Yeah.
And I wonder what his preparation was like, because storytelling to me is a pattern. Like it's just a pattern. That's it. And if you follow the pattern, I've got my own thing. I'm really curious to compare our methodologies because so far, everything for the most part that you've said, I go, lay that right over the top of what I'm doing. I'm coaching the same thing in my way to the type of client that I have.
Yeah.
And I think of Jesus and go, well, did he have like a plan going up there, or did he just do it from his background? Because I always teach people to feel really confident about who you are and your information and have it all out, write it all down, make sure you put your stories in some Google Drive file that says, these are my stories, so that you don't forget that moment you met somebody or had an experience that you can share with someone where they look at you and go, I'm just like you.
Yeah.
And they get that me to we connection that you're talking about, where now you're telling their story, not yours, to them.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if he had a pattern. I wonder if he was following it, because I could probably go back and read what others wrote about him and find some of those patterns if I took some of that time. But I'm interested in what you think. Do you feel like storytelling is just about a pattern? Do you feel like it's about knowing yourself? Like, what do you think good storytelling is really about?
I think there is a structure, pretty universal structure. I mean, I have a 4-step method, and I can even share with you really quickly what it's like. And I've actually simplified it, because at first it was 6 steps. But since I was working it with, with corporate leaders, I always had to, my challenge is always, how do I make this simpler? Because when I go in a meeting with a director, if I'm telling him, look, I'm going to help you create a really good story, I was like, if I can get him to like believe that in 4 steps he can create a really good story, I think I'll have buy-in, right? Because one of the biggest challenges with corporate leaders is time, and you're not going to be able to go in a meeting and be like, look, here are the 20 steps so you can create a great story. The hero's journey, 21 steps,
story brand,
or the Pixar method. No. So I actually simplified the process to 4 steps. My method is called COSA. Right? COSA in Spanish means thing, and the reason why COSA is to remember kind of the principles. But also because when I teach, I always say, I'm going to teach you la cosa más importante. I'm going to teach you the most important thing so you can craft a strategic story.
That's great.
And
I love that.
Cosa
marketing.
is a way that people remember, because I'm like, at the end of this process, whenever you think of the word cosa, you're going to remember the 4 steps. So what I've done with these 4 steps is I've kind of, and I have a psychology background, right? So I'm a psychologist as well. So I've tried to mix psychology in with all this. I think that's kind of the added value as well that I give. And what I've learned is in a process, like in a learning process, there are certain principles that people need to connect with, right? In order for learning to occur. And the first step, I call it the context. Okay, the context. That's the first step of any good story. You gotta create the context.
Paint the scene.
The context is, to me, like the simple terms. It's being able to answer 3 questions: where, when, and who. Where did it happen? When did it happen? And who did it happen to? Usually in the context, you're just trying to answer those 3 questions. Now the objective, because each steps has a goal, right? An objective. And this is where I always tell my clients, like, focus on the goal. Because if you're able to understand the objective, now you can even get more creative in doing this, because I don't want to just always give them just like, you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like I always tell them, obviously in the context, answer those 3 questions. And it's really simple when you start practicing it and you start realizing that all the stories we tell, we always start with the where, the when, and the who. Like, 2 weeks ago, I was sitting at my home with my dog. When, where, who, right? That's how we always start stories. Or 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting with my team in the central offices. When, where, and when they start seeing it like that, they're like, oh, so I'm constantly using these steps that create the context. Now, the important thing is to understand that in the context, you want to obviously start putting in some details to help people to really visualize and start going into the scene with you. But the goal is to create connection.
Yeah.
That's the goal in the first stage. You got to get people to connect with your story. Usually you get that through the characters of the story. Right? The characters are crucial because we connect as human beings with human beings. So even when we're little kids and they tell stories about the 3 little pigs and all that, they're animals. But if you remember, they would put people characteristics because we connect with that. Yeah. Right. So the objective in the context of any good story, the C, is to create connection. So when you're crafting out your story, you're thinking, okay, when, where, who, right? But when I introduce the who, how do I introduce the who or the characters of the story in a way that connects with my audience? Which also implies that you have to ask yourself, who is my audience?
Yep. It's so interesting because we're going down this road and I'm like, when it comes to storytelling, that's the activity.
Yeah.
The preparation for storytelling also is something. I call it story onboarding. It's like, what is the story going to be about? That preparation phase is way longer than the storytelling phase.
Exactly.
Like we do that in the middle of our story. It might be 60 seconds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, but it could have been weeks, months, years of preparation to get that down, And that's why I was asking, like, do you feel like it's a pattern? Do you feel like it's internal? Because at some point, my opinion is people switch from needing to be prepared to tell a story to understanding the philosophies well enough that they can share a story on the fly that already matches the correct parameters. Because I've seen my mentors do it. I've felt myself do it where I actually have a cue anytime I'm trying to say something for a client or someone I'm coaching and I don't know what to say, like, because they want me to say, well, what does that sound like? You do it. Yeah. And I'll be like, okay. And this is my cue. I say, it sounds like this. and then I just go.
Yeah.
And that cue is something that didn't work for the first 3 months. I would say it sounds like this, and then I'd come out with something and it sounded like, you know, but then I started developing that and realized like how much my clients appreciated me going, I'll say it for you. You'll have a video of me doing it so you can go watch it. If you do it as you, don't repeat my words and my energy and my background. Like you are you, but here's an example.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm sharing my opinion now on it. I feel like there is a point where people cross over that. And I think what ends up happening is when people like have true wisdom in their life, where they want to tell the story for the audience.
Yeah.
Not for the rush they feel. That when we tell a story for the rush we feel, and we do it, and because we all know, like if you've ever been on a stage, there's really hardly anything like it in the entire world, especially a big crowd. You know,
amazing.
it's so much fun. It's a rush, and it's an addiction. It's the same chemical as opiates. I know that because I was an opiate addict for 6 years, and I've been clean for 14. So you know, claps for me. The chemical's the same thing. And so when we're up on stage telling stories, are we doing that for us or for the audience? And the more prep we have, the more we're doing it for them.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm of the opinion that format can be utilized on the fly with the proper like activity and accountability to trying to get there as a human being. Yeah.
And I think also just like any skill, right? At first, when you're practicing a skill, you know, you have the method. And in my case, 4 steps, someone could have 6 steps, whatever it may be, but you have the method. And at first, initially, when you're practicing it, you know, it feels a little bit unorthodox because you're putting your stories into structure and you're giving it, you know, a certain order to it. But the more you practice it, it becomes first, I think it becomes a habit. And then once you have that habit down, now you can really perfect it and it becomes a skill set. So yeah, in my case, a lot of times I'm also on the fly, you know, telling a story and I'm using my structure, but I'm not even thinking about the structure because it just becomes a habit. It just becomes a skill. I think of it like someone who plays a sport, right? When they're learning initially, whatever the technique they're learning, they have to think about it a lot and they have to repeat it over and over again. But it gets to a point where you're out there on
just repetition,
and it just happens. You're not thinking about it anymore. You're just out there doing it.
I love that. And the doing it allows you to get feedback.
Yeah.
And you can't do feedback off of stuff you do in your head. That's my biggest pet peeve when I'm coaching people and they say, "Oh, I've got it, man. I've run it through my head. I know exactly what I'm going to do."
Yeah.
Like you've run it through your head. Get it off your mouth. Get it out there. See how it sounds. Look at your energy. Go watch your video. Turn the sound off so that you can see what your body language looks like. Find a way to actually make yourself get into the heat of the moment because everything changes in that heat of the moment. If you're even like, we're talking, I'm always thinking in terms of public speaking and the energy that comes when you stand in front of 1,000 people and suddenly all eyeballs are on you. And if you don't say something, everyone's wondering what's going on. It's a big feeling.
Yeah.
Well, it's no different than someone who's not comfortable with people walking into a boardroom and they're in a group of their peers and they've got to tell a story about how the marketing team's idea didn't work and the company needs to be able to go to bat with more ad spend in order to get to the goals for the quarter. That's a story for them to walk in and get buy-in and create context. And then whatever your OSA, we're going to learn here in a minute, to create context, that if she feels confident in herself in that story, she can walk in and really, you know, tell a good story. But if she doesn't and she tries to present the data sucks. Yeah. You just told me the data sucks. The data says that you didn't make money, so the data is not going to get you there. The story inside the data, the story that includes the context that you're talking about is what's going to help make that persuasion happen. So I love the format. I want to keep going on it. C is context. What do we do next? We've connected now.
The second step after you've achieved connection is the obstacle. The second step is obstacle. There's always got to be some kind of a conflict in your story.
Yeah.
Right. I actually even like I tell my clients, if your story doesn't have any kind of obstacle, no conflict, no difficulty, no challenge, it's not even worth telling.
Yep.
Right. And it's one of the biggest mistakes I've actually seen, especially in the corporate world, is some leaders like, okay, I'll tell a story, but I'm not going to talk about like the bad things that happened. You know, they always just want to jump to the good news. And I always tell them the good news, the reason why the good news matter is because of the conflict. It's because of the difficulty. It's what gives it relevancy, right? When you go to the movies, you know, if the movie just started and everything was great, you'd probably walk out of that movie. What we what we crave as human beings, what catches our attention, what connects us emotionally, invests us emotionally, is the conflict. Now, in storytelling, and this is to me one of the secret weapons of a storyteller. In storytelling, in order to really, really engage your audience in the conflict, you as a storyteller, you have to show vulnerability. Vulnerability to me is that secret ingredient. And it's hard at first for a lot of, especially, sometimes professionals, because we tend to think of vulnerability as weakness. We tend to think of vulnerability as, even in Latin America, you use the word vulnerabilidad to talk about poverty. And so a lot of people are like, no, like, I can't show vulnerability. And I always tell them, vulnerability breeds credibility, right? When you are vulnerable and you're able to show vulnerability, and understanding vulnerability from the psychological standpoint, which is your ability to show honestly your emotions. That's being vulnerable. When you're able to show what you feel, like if you're going through a hard time, right? And I ask you, hey man, how's it going? And you're like, it's being rough. It's been rough for me.
Yeah.
You're being vulnerable. What do most people do, even if they're going through a hard time? Oh no, everything's great.
Yeah, living the dream. That's the thing. Anytime someone says living the dream, I'm like, tell me what that dream is. And then they immediately go, man, I have no time. My life sucks. I don't have a good relationship with my spouse. It's like you are masking your life right now by saying that.
Yeah.
I'm going to add to that because I want to push back a little bit. I believe in vulnerability so much.
Mm-hmm.
And in my method, I say perfection never rings as truth as a standard. Like we want to show the imperfection.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add on top of that, vulnerability when we're trying to help people take action must be when we are on the other side of the pain that we're trying to help them solve. Because if we're still in the middle of that pain and our vulnerability comes out in that way, we have to be a chapter ahead in the book. If we're not a chapter ahead in the book, we can't, go in and tell people like, with our vulnerable state.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that vulnerable state doesn't work in a different situation, but knowing when to use what vulnerable state and how is very important because that vulnerability will come across the right way when the context is right.
Yeah.
When the context is wrong, that's when you're going to run into some challenges. So I am in complete agreement and also would add vulnerability on the other side of your pain is where we should deliver. Is where we should deliver solutions.
In the process, obviously, when we're selecting stories, right? Because to me, the process of finding and selecting a story comes way before crafting it, right? You first have to select the story, and to select the story, you got to know your audience, the message, the objective. But I have 5 filters that I teach them when we're selecting a story. All right, so we have 3 or 4 stories that we could use. Which one should we use? Which one's the best? And one of the filters that we use is I tell them enjoyment, right? Enjoyment. What does that mean to me is like you could see yourself telling that story and enjoying yourself, like it really having fun telling that story.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the story doesn't have, its vulnerability or sad spot, but when someone can enjoy telling a story, even of a vulnerable moment, to me, that's the sign that they've been able to.
I love that.
I am
going to immediately add that into my repertoire, if you don't mind, because
no,
especially right now. So I work with a level of client that doesn't want to be on social media because they look at it as a joke. I just started doing it like a couple months ago. It is so vulnerable. It is so much is not what I originally thought. The whole time going into starting social media, I thought, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be up and doing that. And now that I'm in, I'm like, how can I make it better and funner and more energizing and do it the way I want to do it and not care? Because I've gotten to the point where I'm not even getting more followers that much, but I'm getting so much good feedback from people that are higher level that are looking at me going, I can see myself on social media now, man. It doesn't seem so bad. And so, because I'm kind of showing them you can be real, you can give value, and you don't have to go and do reaction videos to stuff that doesn't align with your message to get the views. I've had people approach me and say, I can get you these followers. I can give you this much money and we'll have 100,000 followers by next week. I'm like, I don't care. I'm not going for followers. I'm not even going for comments. I'm going for live interactions with people that come from social media that now I get to be face to face, because the real value comes when you get to know me. Yeah. Because online, you don't know me. I could be totally full of crap through every video I do. But you get in front of me and you sense the energy and you see me do what I do live, completely different experience.
Yeah.
So learning how to get comfortable and tell something that makes it easy. This is what I've been trying to think of a way to say it to my clients because, like I said, they don't want to be on social media. But I think it's mostly because they have been watching everyone else going, I don't want to do it their way. And they haven't found how to tell their story in enjoyment.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I want to know what those other things are, man. We're going to have so much more time together.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. So I'll shoot really quick through them. So the O is the obstacle. The objective here is to get people to feel emotion. In the obstacle, what you want to get is emotional investment. So you want people to feel things, because the more they feel, the more they'll connect and the more they'll remember your story, the more relevancy your story will have for them. So in the obstacle, that's where with my clients, we play around and see, all right, how do we get people to just feel different emotions? Obviously, through the storyteller, you have to show vulnerability here, and we can play around with different emotions that you want people to feel. But again, the objective is get them to feel so that way they can continue listening to your story, right? Because we don't want to lose them here. Now, once you're able to get them to feel, that's the objective in the obstacle. Now you go on to the third step, the S, which is the solution. The happy ending of any story, right? That's kind of the structure of all stories. They all have to, in a way, get to the solution.
Yeah, there's some sort of, it comes together, it catalyzes.
Yeah, I always tell them that there's one of two questions that you should answer at this stage. Either, how did you solve it, right? If it's a personal story you're telling, how did you solve the problem, the issue? Or what did you learn from it?
Yeah.
Because sometimes there are stories where there's not a solution or a clear solution to it. Maybe there's a story I've told a few times where when I was a kid, I left the gate open, my backyard gate, and my dog ran out and got ran over by a car.
Wow.
And
immediate emotion.
Yeah, and when I tell that story, obviously right now I'm just giving you a summary of it, but when I tell that story, there's no happy ending to that story. There's not the typical, I jumped and saved my dog before a car hit him. My dog died, right? But I did learn something from it. I did learn maybe what I could have done better for the next time. And then when I did have a dog afterwards, I did take different care of it, and I was much more careful than before. So I learned something from it, which is one of the objectives here in the solution is to show the change or transformation of the main character of the story. So I tell my clients, like, look, when I'm teaching you this, I'm opening up the curtains, right? I'm telling you what's really behind the structure of any story. And this will probably take a lot of the magic away from stories.
I always say, like, a tactic shown is a tactic blown is what we hear from people.
Yeah.
I think people that truly care to go and rehearse, to see your information, I think they have more respect for it. That's been my opinion. Like the people that say, oh, you do that, they don't care to go learn how to do it. They just want to poke fun of you for something that is, to them, can sound manipulative.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that you're willing to share it. I'll share mine directly after, because there's so much similarity. I don't want you to feel like you just came on and shared your thing. I'll share mine too.
I mean, this is part of my purpose too, man. Is going out here and sharing these methods. I know that some people will grab some stuff from me, some stuff from you. At the end, what we want is just to help people to be better storytellers and better communicators, right? Because if they are, they'll be able to get their messages and they'll be able to get their ideas across. And I think the world is a much better place when everyone has that skill set to be able to do that. Now, so I was talking about the solution, right? The purpose of any story, when you really study stories, what you realize is that all stories, what they're trying to show you is the transformation process of a character. That's the essence of any story, is they're trying to show you a character that you've connected with from the very beginning. He went through some struggle, some difficulty, and now at the end, he either solved it or he became different from having gone through it. And that is the essence of any story. And as I've studied thousands of stories, and they all kind of have that same arc where there's a character, goes through struggle, and then at the end, he overcomes it. And overcoming it means solving it, and to solve it, a lot of times you got to have help from others, or something supernatural happens to you, or you just learn. You learn from the experience. Now that, to me, those three steps, if you understand the three principles, you usually, with those three, you have a good story, right? You have a context to generate connection, obstacle to generate emotion, and the solution to be able to show the change or the transformation of the character. To me, the fourth step is what makes this whole process strategic, because the fourth step is the application, the A. And the application has everything to do with the audience, because in the application part of your storytelling process, this is where you explain to the audience, what does it have to do with them?
How to use it, all that stuff.
Yeah, because people are going to listen to your story, and if you're obviously a good storyteller, they'll be like, oh, fun story, interesting story. But at some point, they're going to be asking themselves, like, okay, and what does this have to do with me? Why is he telling me this story? And in that application part, that's where we, in a way, connect your big idea that you're trying to communicate to your story. So that way, every time people remember the story, which we know stories are up to 20 times more memorable than just facts and data, people will also remember the idea or the message that you're trying to connect to that story. That's why I believe that we can practically use any kind of story if we're able to connect effectively at the end the idea or the message that we're trying to get across. I tell a story, and this is a story that I tell with corporate, directors and everything, of when my son was sick, my youngest son was sick, and I had to give him his medication, and he didn't want to take the medication. And the whole story is me trying to give my son his medication. At the end, my wife, I have to call my wife, right? Hey, what do I do? And my wife's like, mix the medication with yogurt, and give it to him. Because he didn't want to take the medication. He was like 4 years old. So, it's quite a battle. And I tell that story. Right now, I'm giving you a summary of it, but I tell the story. And at the end of the story, right, I tell them, so the secret was to mix the medicine with the yogurt. And I pause, right? This is where I use, technique like the pause. And people are like, hey. And I'm like, you're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with us as leaders? Like, what does, Cesar giving his son his medication and mixing it with you, what does it have to do with us? And I say, it has everything to do with you, because every day you're faced with the same challenge. Every day when you communicate to your teams, you're trying to give them medication, right? Your strategy, your goals, your new product, it's medication, something that will help. But just like my son, when I'm trying to give him his medication, he resists it. Your team will also resist it. Many times it's not going to be something fun for him. And you're thinking like, okay, so what should I do? Should I play with them? Should I do it? Because when I tell my story, I'm like, my second strategy was doing the whole airplane thing, and my son just, threw the spoon out everywhere. And so I'm like, yeah, you've been there, right? So I'm like, so we try different things, right? We try to create a cool PowerPoint presentation, or we try to go in there and we try to speak, but they're going to resist it, right? Because no one likes medication. The secret is learning how to mix the medication with the yogurt. The medication is the idea or the strategy that you're trying to communicate. The yogurt, stories. Because just like yogurt and just like stories, we like them. And you know what's happened? I this is a story that I started using probably like 5-6 years ago. I've had clients that I ran into 3-4 years later, and they'll tell me, hey, Cesar, every day I'm mixing the yogurt. I'm mixing the medication with the yogurt. They remember it. That is when you're able to really, in the A or the application part, connect the message or the idea to the story. So now every time they remember the story, they'll remember your message. That is COSA. I just taught you la cosa más importante. Context, obstacle, solution, and application.
I love the application part. Mine doesn't have an application part at the end. I think the application is seen through the activity. I've got a little bit of a different one, but it follows the same exact philosophy. So mine is CPR, is give your story like CPR.
Okay.
And it's commonality, which I then teach from there, people, place, things, and times.
Okay.
So the same thing you do.
Yeah.
And then points of decision is the P. And that's those moments that you're talking about where we make a decision and we can recognize transformation, because that point of decision eventually becomes the activity. Because that's what we're helping them experience up here is I can be in the middle of that choice. I can make that choice. And then from there, I can have a clear understanding of what's going to happen. So when you tell your story about, medicine, that point of decision of what do I do, the value I got out of what you said, there were two. The mixing part, I'm like, man, that's a great way to talk about stories, because I always talk about stories and mixing details together.
Yeah.
The second was, what was your response to not knowing what to do? And that's such a good lesson to teach people. That to me is a great point of decision where you go, I got to call someone who's got more skill than this. Your wife knows in 2 seconds, like, this is what you do, because she's been in that situation.
Done it hundreds of times.
So I love that. I love that moment as well, because it shows good behavior. It's like, if you don't know, go to someone who's experiencing it on a daily. That's a great lesson. So there's so many good lessons from what you have. So point of decision, and then, we just describe that moment in time where there's an A or B situation where A or B can happen. And then the R is result. What is the result of that point of decision? And that's where you went, ask yourself, what did I learn? And what was the other one? What was the problem that I...
Also in the solution phase, it's either how did I solve it?
How did I solve it?
Or what did I learn? Yeah,
what did I learn? Those are the two ways. So I look at that and go, yes, that makes perfect sense. That's a perfect flow. When I'm describing it, I'm saying that there's horror stories and there's success stories. The horror stories teach us and all this stuff. The success stories motivate us and help us get hyped, you know? So we kind of diverted a couple times, but I would say that my practice of going through and trying to create my own curriculum based on what I felt and saw in coaching and in reading personal development books and being on the stage as much as I have, I felt what I was building was unique. I'm learning that the names of it are very unique, but these are very standard practices that when you have someone really experienced, they can share them in a way where you can apply them. And so I love your A at the end, because it is so important that the end of my presentation, I call it the invite. That's my ending segment, is the invite, because if you don't tell people how to use the info, where to go with it, what to do with it, they won't do anything. I know this. I've been in 5,000 plus seminar rooms, sitting there trying to get people to learn things. And the people that would come back to me with their notes, I would look at their notes and I would go, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? What do you think they said? I have no idea. I have no idea. That's why I started labeling the presentation, so people would come up to me after and I go, what does that mean? Oh, that's what I'm going to do next week. What does that mean? Oh, I'm going to talk to my daughter about this. What does that mean right there? I've got people on my team. I got to train that to them. That's going to be really good.
Yeah.
So they started going through and labeling their things, because people get hyped and excited and they aren't as good at follow through. And if we don't give them like the puppy dog close with our story, where they get to take the story home with them, the story's going to go away. So we've got to make it so memorable that it sticks with them, because otherwise they're not going to use it. So when you end with application, you're ending with, here's how you get to use it. Instead of just going, oh, I did such a good job telling a story, which is what a lot of people will do. And they'll high five each other going, how good, everybody loved me. They come up to me after and said it was amazing. But if you were to ask them, it was amazing, what did you learn? What are you going to do tomorrow? I think a lot of times people will go, not sure. I don't know. I don't know if it's applicable to me. So I love that you have added that in, because that shows me you have experience, because you know that that is what is necessary. Stories are supposed to inspire action. So if there's no activity at the end, take the story out. Take it out.
And that is remember how each stage has an objective, a goal? The objective or the goal in the application is to motivate your audience to take action. And a lot of times motivating the audience to take action can start with something very simple. It doesn't have to be something complex. You know, a lot of times, like I've been in seminars too, where at the end, you know, they give the invitation, they're giving you a checklist of things. You're probably not going to do any. But if you have one or two quick actions that you can take and that you can start seeing results, people start getting momentum off of that.
I love that. And really, just a quick tip for anyone that wants to know how to do that in a group. When you get to the end, ask them, how are you going to use this? What is applicable? What are the things that you're going to utilize this for? And be ready for people that are going to say things that you may not have expected, because they may be ready to apply something based on what you said and you didn't frame it well. You didn't have good context and they were taking it in a different way. So it is good. I like to take those opportunities after the event so I don't kind of sour the whole group, but I do love to get feedback like that. And so learn to be good at feedback. I have been doing some Instagrams recently on feedback. I had another guest on that was talking about feedback, and I said, well, what are your best advice on feedback? He says, my advice is people aren't going to give it to you, and they won't be honest with you until you press them. And he goes, find people who will be honest with you and will actually tell you the truth. Because when you're in leadership, when you're in public speaking, when you're in an arena where people around you are telling you you're right often, I have learned that people in those situations, they don't know how to turn it off. And they need to learn how to listen better and approach things better. And so getting good feedback from people is about going, I'm going to go 7 layers deep on your feedback. Instead of just going, okay, well, it was good. And you're going, oh, thank you. I practiced so hard and it was so much. And I'm so glad that it went well. Thank you I needed that. That is so good for me. Like, think of how self-promoting that is when you do that. Instead, going, thank you. I appreciate the feedback. So tell me what you learned. And going deeper and finding out where you're at, you will learn whether or not you're a great presenter and whether the story worked. Because if they can't remember it at that point, they will not remember it in the future. So I love the accountability and the application of the storytelling. So let's catch everybody up. So you come back to Utah. We went, both of us, to a little school called Orem High. You were a little younger than me. And so I ended up at another school called Timpanogos, but we were just talking about some of the guys we played basketball with and some of the coaches we had together and all that stuff. So catch us up. Tell us about what you're doing now. You came back from Chile, was it?
Yeah, I was in Chile for 20 years. So after I finished high school, went back to Chile on a trip and met a girl. I met a Chilean girl and ended up getting married and kind of started my whole professional, adult life there in Chile. Stayed longer than what I expected. But now I came back 2 years ago, actually. I came back to study a master's in professional communications, just to add more stuff to the toolkit. And our plan initially was to just be here, 2-3 years and then go back to Latin America. But after about a year and seeing how our kids have really loved it here and adapted really well, with my wife, we were like, okay, what can we do to extend our visit? And I actually, the U.S. government offered me a special visa to stay here longer and to be able to start my business. So now I've opened up a branch of my storytelling business here in the States. And I'm in this phase of just getting out there, getting people to know what I do and positioning my brand as the storytelling expert like I am in Latin America, but also here in the States.
Awesome. I'm going to press you on what you say you do as storytelling. Give us some application. Give us some way to apply what we learned today quickly. And then I also would love to know how, if anyone wants to reach out to you, how do we follow you on Instagram? What's your handle? And I'll put it all into the comments, or in the description, but how do we get a hold of strategic storytelling?
Okay. So a quick application. I mean, just with the COSA method that I taught you, I think we all have stories already. That's one thing that I've always ran into when people even hire me to help them with their stories. They already have stories. I mean, stories are just part of who we are, right? So if you really start digging in, you'll see people have stories. Sometimes they don't have the story bank, right, where they've written down their stories and things, which you can get people to start doing that. But if you just grab a story, just a story that you already have or that you commonly use with your team or that you're using with your product or the service that you're trying to get out, if you grab that story and just make it go through COSA, like just filter it quickly. Like, okay, does it have context? Does it have obstacle? Does it have solution? Does it have an application? I can guarantee most of the time what happens with my clients is that they'll say like, holy crap, my story just got like really, really sharp just by going through the COSA method, right? So I always tell them like, pass it through the COSA method and see what comes out at the other side. And you'll notice that you'll probably have a much clearer, simpler, and much more relevant story.
Oh, I love that. It is so simple. And the application or the ability to come find you, come to your website.
Yeah, so my website is www.cesarcastro.com. That's my website in English. If you go to my website, you'll see everything that I'm doing, my podcast, because I also have the Strategic Storytelling podcast in English now, because we have one in Spanish, which is one of the most downloaded podcasts in Spanish on storytelling. And now we started it in English. So if you go to my page in English, you can also listen to it there or anywhere where you listen to podcasts. And just on my page, you'll get just a general view of what I'm doing and how I can help people and businesses to become great strategic storytellers.
Awesome. I know we're going to be doing so much stuff together. I can't wait to invite you to be a trainer at one of my events so that you can come and share some of this, because you taught me a lot today. This has been really fun. I came into this knowing I was going to learn. That was my intention. And I was like, how am I going to learn from him? And I walked away feeling very uplifted and feeling like we have a very similar commonality to wanting to help people.
Yeah.
And having this desire to go, communication's not as challenging as you're making it. You can make this easier. You mentioned, how people have 70 to 80% of their day are met communicating.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what your stats are, but you can Google this. And there's a study, I can't remember if it was Columbia or I feel like it started with a C. It might have been like Columbia, like the country university. But they talked about 70 to 80% of our day is spent communicating, of our waking hours. And, I always like to go back to Aristotle, who said 95% of our day is habit. And Tony Robbins, I think he says about 80% of what we do is just a habit. The analogy is you get in your car sometimes and you drive all the way home and then you pull in the driveway and went, how did I get here? You ever experienced that?
Yeah.
Well, I believe communication is a system and it's a habit. And if 95% of our day is habits, or 80 to 95%, depending on who you listen to, and 70 to 80% of our day is spent communicating, I think the number one thing that we can do to change the world is to have better communication skills.
Yeah.
Is to focus on how do I get this connection to be more authentic, to be more real, and to be something that benefits, the collective. So very excited that you're pursuing and helping all of these individuals to be able to get those communication skills in place. If you were to define your target audience, who would you say your target audience is of people that can work with you?
Mainly business leaders and entrepreneurs. I love working with entrepreneurs, especially because I feel like all entrepreneurs need to be really good communicators to be able to get their message out, to be able to inspire their teams. But I work a lot with business leaders in the corporate world and with entrepreneurs who have their businesses and are growing and want to obviously expand and just multiply their growth even more. Communication skills is the number one way to do that.
Awesome. Cesar Castro, thank you so much for spending time here today. Here at Ignite Studios, thank you, Krista Casey, for the use of this studio. It is incredible. And we will see you next time on the Robbie Law Podcast.